Welcome to the France 24 debate. The fallout over the drone attacks on Saudi oil installations continues. Petrol price rises are predicted to be imposed very quickly at the pumps as world oil production is badly disrupted. Now, the US President Donald Trump was the first to react, and he instantly blamed Iran for the situation, tweeting that the US was locked and loaded, a phrase that had many people twitching, implying he's ready to retaliate in a military fashion against the Iranians. Iran denied being behind the attack. The attack has actually been claimed by the Houthi rebels from Yemen. They are supported by the Iranians. The Houthis have said, adding to this, they are ready to attack again. Well, this Monday, the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, says he has information which confirms Iraq's denial that its territory was used to launch the attack. You see how this story is spreading and spreading with its influence. Russia, another name being brought into the equation, has spoken out to condemn the strikes, but also to say not be hasty in blaming the Iranians. The attack on Saturday halted production of 5.7 million barrels of crude a day. This represents more than half of Saudi Arabia's global daily exports. A return to normal production could take some 2 months. As a result, Brent crude has hit its highest percentage price rise since the run-up to the Gulf War in 1991. And that figure is something like a 10% rise in the price of Brent crude. And that will, of course, be passed on to the consumer at some time, I can predict, fairly soon. Let's introduce you to our guests for this debate here at France 24. Here in the studio, Julien Daron, who's consultant in international security, lecturer at international conflicts at Sciences Po, and associate researcher at CAREB here in Paris. Julien, thank you very much indeed for joining us as ever. Joining us from afar, we have three guests in no order of preference here. This is just how it fell on my studio notes. In studio in Tel Aviv, rather, Ofer Bronstein, who's president of the International Center for Peace in the Middle East. Ofer, thanks for being with us. Joining us in the studio in Tehran, Syed Mustafa Koshashem, who's professor of journalism at the Fars Media Faculty at the Applied Sciences University. Thank you, sir, for being with us. And joining us by Skype from Washington, Fatima Abu Al-Asra, who's a senior analyst at the Middle East Foundation. Thank you, too, for being with us. I'll let you loose in a moment to discuss everything related to this story. But first, a roundup from our reporter here at France 24, Alison Sargent.
Half of Saudi Arabia's oil production up in smoke after the drone attacks targeting its largest processing plant and a major oil field. The kingdom's energy minister confirmed they've had to slash production by 50%, the equivalent of 5% of the world's oil supply.
The minister stressed that these attacks are not only aimed at the vital installations of Saudi Arabia, but also at the global oil supply and its security, thus posing a threat to the global economy.
The attacks were claimed by Yemen's Houthi rebels, who are backed by Iran. They said it was retaliation for Saudi Arabia's intervention in Yemen, where since 2015 the kingdom has been leading a coalition fighting against them. In recent months, the Houthis have carried out a series of drone and missile attacks on airports and oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. But U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo directly blamed Iran for the bombings.
Tehran is behind nearly 100 attacks on Saudi Arabia, while Rouhani and Zarif pretend to engage in diplomacy. Amid all the calls for de-escalation, Iran has now launched an unprecedented attack on the world's energy supply. There is no evidence the attacks came from Yemen.
Saudi Arabia's northern neighbor, Iraq, has denied suggestions that the drones were launched from pro-Iranian forces on their territory. Iran, meanwhile, responded to the U.S. accusations, calling them blind and meaningless.
Alison Sargent and Cole Stangler with that roundup. Let's begin our debate by bringing in Fatima Abu Al-Asra, senior analyst at the Middle East Foundation, joining us live from Washington. Fatima, I hope you can hear us. We're having some problems with other guests. We'll bring them in as and when we're sure we can connect to them. But I know I can see you now. It's great. And I hope you can hear me. In terms of what Donald Trump has said about being locked and loaded, I mean, clearly that made lots of people sit up and take notice and be concerned about what might happen next. Do you think the president might revise what he said? Live television is a very unpredictable animal at times. We will bring in Fatima when we have a clear link to her and we can hear what she says. I'd be interested to get her reply to it. Let's bring in Julian Theron, who's with us in the studio. And as I can see you, I know I can hear you, sir. Can I put the same question to you? When Donald Trump came out with that phrase, locked and loaded, I mean, certainly I said it and thought, good heavens, what does he mean?
It's a bit complicated for Donald Trump because indeed, like you underlined it, locked and loaded, it's a kind of threat, diplomatically speaking. It means that he's ready to act. The problem with Donald Trump and more generally with the US strategy with Iran is that for a while they had different options. Meaning, for instance, Barack Obama wanted to talk to Iran to reach an agreement on their nuclear program for nuclear weapons. And in this respect, they allowed Iran to develop what we call proxies, meaning usually non-state armed groups throughout the region. A lot in Iraq, actually, and the Obama administration knew that the pro-Iranian groups were developing and so on, and later on in different places, like Syria, for instance. So it means that to reach this agreement with the international community, the Europeans, Russia, the UN, and the US, Washington decided to let the Iranian influence in the region grow. On this, Donald Trump has been elected, and then he seized this occasion to actually retract from the deal, meaning that all the Iranian influence that spread in the region, whether legitimate or not it is, that's not the question. But all this influence was actually for nothing then, because there was no deal anymore, because the US, well, the deal is still existing between, for instance, Iran and the Europeans, and there's complications on that. But the US is now in a complicated situation because it retracted from the deal and says, well, it's not possible to let Iran get an influence. So that's the first part of the problem. The second part of the problem is that Donald Trump said, so now we got a maximum pressure strategy on Iran, and we put bad sanctions until Tehran goes back to the table on negotiation to have another deal. But the problem is that they reached some steps to say that we might actually strike Iran, but we knew that there was a couple of events that showed that Donald Trump might not be keen to strike Iran, actually, eventually. Because first, for instance, remember that the US sent a missile, and strangely a bit, Donald Trump called the missile back, actually, said that, oh, he decided because of the civilian casualties that he wouldn't go forth and so on, when usually, of course, you know these kind of things before launching it. So we know that Donald Trump doesn't want that much to strike Iran for unknown reasons on these. And the other element is that he actually fired John Bolton, who was the hardliner on Iran. So you see, he wants to play the hardline to appear unlike Barack Obama, that he disliked quite much. And on the other side, reaching classical physical war with Iran is a bit tensed, of course.
Julian, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Fatima Abu al-Asra now, joining us by Skype from Washington, senior analyst at the Middle East Foundation. Fatima, I hope you can hear us now, and I hope most of all we can hear you, because your thoughts and opinions are what this is all about. Julian Theron there from CAREP here in Paris was responding to the question I put to you earlier about locked and loaded, that phrase that Donald Trump used. Do you think if we could wind back the clock, Donald Trump maybe would have been advised to use different words?
So much of what's going on, Mark, is about rhetoric, because no one can afford to take action here besides Iran. So Trump definitely has to offer what he can say right now, which is a strong stance against the belligerent attack that the Iran or its militias have conducted overseas. Now, in terms of the action, I think this is where he's going to face problems, because Trump does not have enough support in the United States to actually go ahead and do something about the attacks, especially that he would be immediately perceived as protecting the Saudis in what looks like a regional problem. But I think a lot of people do not understand that it was the United States that actually led in this escalation when it had cut the Iran deal, and its regional allies in the Middle East are suffering the consequences. So I think at this stage, we're just going to see an escalation in rhetoric, but not necessarily in action.
Fatima, bear with us. Quick reply from Julian.
Yes, Mark, because there might be one or two elements, but I'm not completely sure that the US president is turning toward this kind of strategy. But of course, there's the economical weapon, if we may say, but there's already some sanctions. And the civilian population, I mean, economic sanctions might work a bit, but it's also contested the efficiency. And for the Iranian situation, I'm not completely sure that the Iranian population is going against the regime because of the US sanctions, or at least because of that.
Indeed.
And the other element, just the other element, is there might be a weapon, which is cyber warfare. But it already existed, actually, on Iranian nuclear facilities. And actually, Iran struck back against Aramco in Saudi Arabia, as far as we imagine that Iran did, meaning that there also this side that actually might in both ways go to the software in itself and injure the economy, the Iranian economy, but also going to the hardware, meaning the facilities themselves, because when you reach the internet, you can provoke physical casualties, of course. So that might be a way between not doing anything, just words, and attacking with classical coercion weapons. It might be something in between like that.
Just to remind everybody, the Houthi rebels from Yemen are claiming responsibility for the attack. A Saudi military spokesman says the attack on the oil installations was carried out with Iranian weapons and didn't originate in Yemen. So the plot, as ever with this one, is going to thicken, and the layer upon layer of this story spreads out even further. Let's bring in Ofer Bronstein, who's joining us from Tel Aviv, president of the International Centre for Peace in the Middle East. And we all want peace in the Middle East. Ofer, as ever, thank you, sir, for being with us. Fatima Abu al-Asra from the Middle East Foundation was talking about Donald Trump using rhetoric, and that's the only weapon he's got. Those words he used, lock and load. And I'm asking you this question given you are in Tel Aviv and there are elections in Israel coming up. And obviously Donald Trump's big friends with Benjamin Netanyahu. Was this a bit of electioneering on behalf of his friend, do you think?
First of all, let me tell you that I'm totally outraged. Why are we having this debate today? We are having this debate today because the Western world is going to be touched in its pocket, having the energy price and the oil price rising in the near future, while every day thousands of Yemenites are dying, of close to 1 million children are on the edge of starvation. A country like Yemen is being destroyed, but nobody cares. When it came to the price of oil, we all of a sudden wake up and we are all concerned by it. This is outraging. Now, about the leadership in the region. You know, you have three kinds of leadership in the region. You have the bad one, the very bad one, and the very, very bad one. They are all pyroman. They are all playing with fire. You know when you start, you never know when it will end. And I'm very concerned. The Iranian regime is being squeezed. The Americans did not respect their deal. They did not respect something that they signed. The international community is trying as much as they can to stick to the deal signed with Iran a few years ago. For President Rouhani and for the Iranian regime to declare in the last few days that they are willing to meet the president of Big Satan. Since the revolution in Iran in the 70s, the two main enemies of Iran was the Big Satan, United States of America, and the small Satan, Israel. For the regime, this regime, terrible regime, to accept a meeting with the leader of the Big Satan, that means the Iranian regime is totally squeezed. The economical situation is catastrophic in Iran. The sanctions are having a very strong toll on the Iranian. The Israelis in the last few months are attacking Iranian presence in Syria and in Iraq. We are in the edge of a very, very difficult situation. For the foreign minister of Iran to come to the G7 2 weeks ago in France was a big step, knowing that the Americans are there. So we have to be very, very careful. And what I would like to see is for the international community, you know, it's Not only is the price rising and whoever is selling oil, but whoever is selling weapons for the last years. The Russians are selling weapons, the Americans are selling weapons, the French are selling weapons. Everybody's selling weapons for millions of dollars, while the people of the region are suffering, are starving, are dying. Enough, it's enough. One day, someone will ask us, where were you when it happened? I'm very afraid of what may happen in the next few days. We never know when this kind of fire can take us. It's time for the international community to be very firm and to stop it. To stop it. It's not only about money, it's not only about weapons, it's not only about interest, it's about people's life. So I hope that the UN, the European, the Russians who are meeting now, very Iranian, today with the Turkish, are going to put pressure on the Iranian, on the Saudis, and to calm down. We are on the edge of a catastrophe. I don't know what will happen in the next few days, and I'm very, very concerned.
Ofer Bronstein, thank you very much indeed. The only thing I would take issue with was reporting of Yemen, and just sort of blow our trumpet a little bit. We've reported extensively about the situation in Yemen, and we will continue to do so, and I agree with you. Not enough can be said about a situation where so many people are at threat and losing their lives. Thank you. I completely agree with you on that, sir, completely. That brings us to the end of part one of this debate. Short break, news update, and then the rest. Part two to come. Stay with us. Welcome back to the France 24 debate, part two for you. We're discussing the implications after the attack on the Saudi oil fields. World production has been more or less halved, with some 5.7 million barrels per day now not available, and oil prices set to rise. But the implications of this go far beyond the effect on people's pockets, and obviously the air of tension across the Middle East is that much thicker now in the light of what has happened, who's to blame, and what the bigger powers are saying about it. Here to discuss this in the studio, Julien Théron, who's the associated researcher at CARIB here in Paris. Julien, thanks for being with us. We're joined from afar by Ofer Bronstein in Tel Aviv from the International Center for Peace in the Middle East. Ofer, thanks for being with us. In Tehran, Sayed Mustafa Khoshesem, who's Professor of Journalism at the Fars Media Faculty, Applied Sciences University, will be joining you in a moment, sir. Thank you for being with us. And by Skype in Washington, Fatima Abu Al-Asra, Senior Analyst at the Middle East Foundation. Fatima, thank you very much for bearing with us. Let's now, if we can, go straight to Tehran and bring in Sayed Mustafa Khoshesem, who's the Professor of Journalism at the Fars Media Faculty. So I hope you can hear us, and we'd be interested to know your views on what has happened, and chiefly on the fact that the US is pointing the finger of blame at Iran for this attack on the Saudi Arabian oil facilities.
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, the claim has been raised against Iran in the backdrop of so many lies that have been told about Iranian involvement in and arms shipment to the Yemenis. We do remember that the United States officials were, raising similar claims about the dispatch of Iranian ballistic missiles or parts to the Yemenis for quite a long time, and despite all the hilarious show that was staged by Nikki Haley, even NATO allies and many others did not buy what they claimed in Washington. But eventually, after the Yemenis stressed that they had purchased the ballistic missiles over a decade ago under President Ali Abdullah Saleh, the Russians confirmed the revelation, and the Yemeni army also stressed that after purchasing the missiles, they had started tampering with and manipulating the missiles, those ballistic missile technology, in order to increase the range and the precision striking by their defense engineers. Now, the same defense engineers have, according to Yemeni sources that have been stressing on that for quite a long time, they have changed some primitive civilian drones into military ones for new objectives. Just the other night, a military analyst, a Saudi military analyst, appeared on the Russian media to stress that all the sophisticated technology and air defense shields that they have bought from the United States have failed to intercept these Yemeni drones because they are primitive ones and they cannot be intercepted. So altogether, the problem here is that the United States is raising claims without any shred of evidence to corroborate the claim. And also, this doesn't seem to be very much logical, since if Iran has equipped the Yemenis with this drones, then when had it done that? The country, Yemen, has been under a tight siege for quite a long time, for many years, and by a dozen nations who are assisted with satellite imagery data, sonar and radar technology of the United States. And how could Iran go through this siege? And this means despise of the United States arms production and arms manufacturers. Or maybe they claim that Iran had done that 5 years ago, 4 years ago, before the country was
can I clarify,
brought
sir?
under the siege. Then in that case, why didn't the Yemenis...
So can I clarify? But you are supporting the Houthi
Yemenis
rebels. That's correct, isn't it?
I didn't get that. I'm sorry.
You are supporting the Houthi rebels in Yemen. You arm the Houthi rebels. Is that correct?
Sure. Not the same way that we are supporting the Lebanese Hezbollah or the Palestinians. Iran has stressed that it's been rendering all types of support for the Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, Iraqis, but it has only been rendering spiritual support for the Yemenis. Even the Iranian Supreme Leader stressed a few months ago that the country is under a tight siege. Otherwise, we would have sent the arms that they need, but we can't because the country is under a tight siege. Not even a small boat could go through.
So for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's get a reaction from Washington with Fatima Abu al-Asra from the Middle East Foundation. Fatima, there's a report in the Washington Post which is saying that the Saudis say that it was an Iranian weapon fired which actually did the damage. I don't know whether there's any comment you've got from there on that one or any thoughts. Have you listened to what our Iranian guest was saying?
I disagree with what he said, and I would... I have a little bit more trust in the American intelligence than he does, and also on the evidence that has been proven and provided previously in terms of the military links between the Houthis and Iran. And there has been weapons that have been intercepted and in the Arabian Gulf that were coming to Iran from Iran, and that was over the course of this year. Definitely the ballistic missile is in the Iranian flagship, and that's something that the Houthis have taken advantage of. I think we're really at a stage where the Houthis themselves are not hiding this relationship with the Iranian backers. Iran has even opened diplomatic relationships with them and accepted the first ambassador from the Houthi rebels. So I understand the person's in your guest in Tehran skepticism, but I think that he might be completely misinformed or just giving another totally different view. Now, in terms of what the Saudis have said today about the attack, of course, because of the general skepticism and because people are really wanting to know what exact evidence is there, I think the Saudis would also have to provide all of the evidence that really show that this is Iranian weaponry that has gone behind this. Of course, in the past, all of the ballistic missiles and the drones that the Houthis have used have been also traced back to Iranian manufacturing. And by the way, I would just have also more trust in the UN panel of experts report that has proved these links. So I would just focus on that.
Fatima, let me pause you there. I need to bring in Julien in the studio, then Offer next. So Julien, you please.
Yes, what we see with the two interventions is that it's actually very hard regarding what we call open source intelligence to know what is happening. Perhaps some intelligence services know for sure if the weapon was Iranian or not. But actually, let's have a glance on the security structure that we have here. Because if we take all the things since a few weeks, we have seen some leaders saying that they can wipe out some countries from the face of the earth, and then after saying like, oh yes, of course, I can shake their hands. In that, I can join offer, saying that actually, yes, there's this volatility that can goes from let's meet to I will destroy your entire country. So we have this volatility, which is a problem. And in plus, it's not only between what we call classically between the countries, the hegemons, between the regional powers, but it's also throughout some groups. And Al-Sharq Al-Awsat, the Saudi newspaper, said today that, of course, it's not the Tamil Tigers who did the attack, and if it is the Houthis, the Hezbollah, or the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, it means that it is Iran. It's very hard to prove that from their point of view, or to dismiss that from the Iranian point of view, because they are aligned strategically, so they might have just get some incentives, some order, or just because they just wanted to do that, the Houthis. So it's almost impossible to prove, but we see how one of the actors, even a small one, even if it's just one of the branch of the Houthis who decided to do that, because of the volatility and the unstable security structure, it can just go like that.
And that is a very difficult and dangerous situation. Ofer Bronstein, waiting for us in Tel Aviv. Over to you, sir.
Well, once again, is it really important which weapon attacked whom? Yesterday it was Iran, a day before it was Saudi Arabia. Let's not forget that the Iranian regime is spending hundreds of millions in weapons. Let's not forget that the Saudi regime is spending hundreds of billions in weapons. The Iranian people are suffering. The thousands and millions of foreign workers in the Gulf countries are near to slavery. The Palestinian people in Gaza are suffering. The people of the Middle East are young, unemployed, and suffering. And those regimes, with the help of the Russian, of the American, of the Western world, are spending all their resources in weapons. One day, someone is going to ask what was for. While we know that global warming is eating the region, the desert is taking over. In few years, we are going to witness millions of refugees coming from the Middle East to the north. We are going to have a humanitarian crisis, and it's going to be terrible. Is it really important to know which weapon killed whom? Do I need the expert from the intelligence to know that this is absolutely unacceptable if it's coming from Iran or if it's coming from the Saudis? What we need, it's true. Listen, we know in Israel, and it's why the Israelis are attacking Iranian target in the last few weeks in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Iraq. We know that the Israelis don't want an Iranian presence in the Middle East. I am afraid that tomorrow or in 2 days, the Iranians are going to push the Hezbollah to attack Israel. Israel will respond. The Lebanese people are going to suffer from it. We don't know where it's going to take us. Once and for all, while the challenges that we are facing of global warming, of poverty, of ignorance in the Middle East, we are wasting all our resources in buying more weapons. In 10 years, in 5 years, we won't be forgiven. It won't be forgotten, and we're not going to being forgiven. I do believe that it's time for the Russian. You know, I'm very glad that the American president is barking, but he's not biting. I'm very glad that he asked Mr. Bolton to leave his office, knowing that the direction that he was taking was a very dangerous one, calling for a war, being very hard on the Iranian. And Mr. Trump understood that it's not exactly a year and a half before election in the United States, it's not exactly the direction he wants to go. It's time for the European, and very happy about the role that Mr. President Macron was playing and is playing in the last few weeks. It's time for the Russian, it's time for the European, it's time for the Chinese, it's time for the American to get together and to say enough, it's enough. We need these resources for the well-being of the people of the Middle East who are suffering. Billions of people are suffering. You know, everybody's talking on behalf of the Palestinian. 1.5 million Palestinians are living in a terrible situation in Gaza. Who is doing something about it? And we are talking about in the name of Palestine. The Palestinian Authority is agonizing because we don't receive neither Israeli help, neither American help for the last year. Who is doing something about it? What are we looking for? A catastrophe in the Middle East? An increase of the war in the Middle East? For hundreds of thousands of people to die in the Middle East? For us to wake up and to stop it? Enough, it's enough. It's time for the superpower, for the UN to get together and to stop it.
Mark.
Nobody knows what this war is for. Nobody knows what this war in Yemen is for.
For Bronstein, I need to pause you there.
I really hope that we are going to wake up and stop it.
Arthur, I need to pause you there. You've made your point very, very forcefully and very clearly. We don't know what this war is for, talking about the situation in Yemen, and I think many people would share your point of view. I noticed Fatima wanting to contribute there. Before I bring you in, Fatima, let me go first to Tehran to get a reaction from Sayed Mustafa Koshesem, who is still with us. Sayed, one is wondering what Iran actually wants. Can you give us, in a nutshell, what Iran wants out of this current situation?
Well, Iran has been stressing very often that it wants peace. It encouraged the Houthi Ansarullah movement to strike a deal, peace deal, and attend peace talks with the Saudis when they were attending talks over the Hodeidah port. The problem here is that the Saudis do not want to get rid of this quagmire that they have made, and they've been killing innocent people, and there is no one to stop them. Why has the United States sold them several hundred billions of dollars of arms? And again, they are in this region, and they are trying to increase the pressures on Tehran in order to force Tehran under the sanctions as well as the military threat to take part in the talks. Another point here is the Israelis. Now, when we think about the Israelis, what are they doing? They have been bombing not just Syria. Nowadays, they have been bombing the popular forces in Iraq. They are escalating the situation, unfortunately, and they are setting fire to the whole region. Remember, when Iran was under threat by the United States and shut down its hostile military drone, Hezbollah never pointed its missiles at Israel. It never bombed Israel. It never launched any missile at Israel because Hezbollah, Palestinians, and others, they are Iranian allies, not puppets or proxies of Iran. They never receive orders from Iran. They think for their own country's best interest, but they are allies of Iran, and Iran supports any movement that needs help when it comes under attack by armies that are armed to the teeth.
Syed, I need to pause you there. Syed, I need to pause you there and bring in the other guests. Thank you, sir. I need to stop you. Syed, thank you very much indeed. Fatima Abu Alastar, over to you. Oh, sorry.
May I say something?
Quickly, you offer. Go ahead, off, and then you, Fatima. Offer first. Go ahead.
I would like to address my Palestinian.
Quickly, please.
To address my Iranian friend in Tehran.
Quickly, please.
I don't believe that our leaders, neither yours or ours in Israel, are going to do the right thing in the near future for the two people to get together. I want to remind you, one of the biggest Jewish communities in the Muslim world is in Iran today, 25,000 Jews. One of the biggest Arab and Jewish from Muslim countries is in Israel. We have a very big Iranian community. Maybe it's time for your civil society and my civil society to push our leader for negotiation, to push our leader for talking. Maybe it's time for you and for me to meet. Maybe it's time for artists from Iran and artists from Israel to meet. Maybe it's time for business people from Iran and business people from Israel to meet. Let's not wait for the politician. Let's take one step forward, because one day, as it was before, Iranian and Israeli will have to live in peace. We'll have to live in peace. Let's do it, you and me and also others who are behind us.
Open invitation there to you, Syed. Have a think about that. Fatima, now let's hear from you.
May I answer?
Oh,
Can I have an answer?
Okay,
to
go
that?
ahead. Go ahead. Yes, please. Sorry, Fatima. Go ahead, Syed.
Well, the problem here is that as long as the Israelis, as long as the Americans are killing people, not just Muslims, but non-Muslims, even Jews and Christians across the region. They are bombing everyone. They are butchering Palestinians in Gaza.
So that has to stop,
They have been
of
killing
course.
Iranian scientists. They are Iranian citizens. Of course there won't be any kind of talks as long as you're living in houses that you've been killing Palestinians, shedding their blood, and then kicking them out of their land. And then, because you are killing also Iranians as well.
So answer his question. Will you meet with him, Offer?
It's an unfortunate fact
Are
that
you
you are
willing
still,
to meet with me to end
you
it?
have done not just killing, you have done cyber attacks on Iranian facilities, not just nuclear ones, but also the infrastructure.
I'm thinking about Stuxnet
This is
now.
what the
It's Iranian,
Americans
isn't it?
have claimed. This is what the Dutch, the British, everyone is saying. They are doing every kind of harm.
Syed,
that they can to this
you've
region,
answered, I think
including
you've replied, although not answered the
as long
question.
as
Let me
you do
pause you,
that,
sir.
There won't be any hope for peace.
Let me pause you. Let me bring in Fatima. Finally, Fatima, over to you. I'm sorry to take such time, but over to you, Fatima.
Okay. That's all right. I completely appreciate Mr. Offer's Bronstein offer for peace. And I think this is where we should be heading for. If there is any escalation in the region, if there's any response from this administration to any response on Iran, the first that will be affected will be the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Yemenis, because there's just Iran's behavior has been completely unpredictable, and it has just used these threats very nonchalantly. I mean, to just attack right and left because they know that the world is not ready for a response. And I just want to say that in terms of thinking about peace, and especially in Yemen, as a Yemeni American myself, and as someone who advocated for peace, we have given the UN envoy all, the mandate, the power to talk to the Houthi rebels and to try to come into an agreement. And there isn't any action that they are currently taking where it serves the peace process. The escalation that occurred by the Houthis have coincided with the American sanctions on Iran. So there is no way that you can tell me that they are not acting as a proxy for Iran and to further their own interests. All what the Houthis have been doing in terms of the escalations inside Yemen and also on Saudi Arabia was just coincided completely with the rejection of the Iran deal by Trump and so on and so forth. There has been even further local fights within Yemen, within the area of Dalia, where Houthis are trying to go back and try to take areas that have been liberated, but they're so close to the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, where I think they want to give Iran a way to control the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. So there are so many internal dynamics. Yemenis are being affected by every single decision that it's happening out there.
Fatima Abu Elsra, I need to wrap you up there. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Offer Bronstein. Thank you to Syed Mustafa Khorshem, also joining us there from Tehran.
I would like to meet my Iranian friend one day.
Let's hope that will happen, sir, and we'll be there to film it too. Thank you, sir, very much indeed. Time now for our Media Watch. Joining myself and Julien Theron here in the studio is Emma James with Media Watch. Good evening. Do people feel this could be a sort of Pearl Harbor moment? Is that what we're seeing?
We're seeing that phrase being bandied about quite a lot, not just from people who you might expect to be scaremongering about this. The phrase that has got people worried is Donald Trump's locked and loaded, which does imply that the US is very much ready to act right now. Of course, he has used that phrase before, so perhaps people shouldn't be quite so concerned. But looking at the overwhelming nature of reactions to this, people are unsettled, to say the least. So we're waiting for the Saudis to tell us, to to tell you what the next move is. Are you serious? Asks this woman, because Donald Trump really did appear to put the ball back in the Saudis' court, saying that they were waiting to hear what they said about who they believed had carried out this attack. America first means Saudi Arabia dictating US foreign policy. Nice, says this Twitter user. And this person saying, I thought we were done fighting the wars of other countries because it's expensive. Yet when someone touches a drop of oil, we're locked and loaded in a few hours. So a lot of different talking points coming up on social media about this particular issue. With the National Security Advisor John Bolton gone, some are asking questions about where exactly Donald Trump is getting his advice from now. This is a piece on the Media Matters website written by Matt Gertz, which is very interesting, saying that basically the Fox and Friends news programme shapes the president's worldview, and what he says from watching their output is that they are really pushing for something to be done about Iran. Some of the quotes from presenters include, I think this cannot go without retribution. They've provoked us before. What stops it from happening here? We've got to protect the world's oil supply. Now, this writer says that it was very much Tucker Carlson who was among those credited with stopping Donald Trump, bringing him back from the brink of acting against Iran last time around. And of course, if there isn't somebody of that nature who he's listening to now, you do wonder what will happen next. Now, the Saudis, of course, have said that, yes, the weapons were from Iran, and they don't believe that they were fired from Yemen. So that leaves the door open to a little bit of conjecture as to where exactly they were fired from. However, there's obviously a great deal of scepticism as to what Saudi Arabia has to say. There's no reason whatsoever to trust either the Saudis or the Trump administration, so it's not clear what the average American citizen can possibly do with this information, says the journalist Seth Abramson. Looking at reactions in Iran, it's interesting to note that the Tehran Times isn't actually leading with this story on their website right now. They are in today's paper, but on their website they've pushed it down the running order a little bit, which perhaps says they're trying not to add fuel to this particular fire. They do have this article on their website, though, where they say that the Americans' claims are both hasty and harmful to everyone. And they quote the Foreign Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, who tweeted that having failed at maximum pressure, now the US was going for maximum deceit on this particular issue. The Iran front page has a very different take, certainly seems to be ratcheting up the pressure here by reporting on the fact that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has said that US targets are within range of Iranian missiles. So that would very much be pointing in the other direction. That perhaps this is going to be escalated. Another thing that it's worth taking a look at is what the information that's coming out of Yemen, because of course the Houthi rebels still say that they were the ones who fired these, who carried out these attacks, and they have reported this. We assure that we can reach wherever we want, and at the time we determine. They are also ratcheting up the pressure with this particular video here, which has been translated by the Middle East Media Research Institute, where they say there is more to come, and they actually threaten Israel in this. Now, this particular channel, Al Mazira, was set up by the Houthi rebels, so it's very much their mouthpiece. So a lot of people ratcheting up the tensions, and we will have to wait and see where this ends.
Indeed, Emma, thank you very much indeed. Israel going to the polls tomorrow in their election, and obviously we'll be covering that at every point. Emma, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to our guest, Julien Theron, here in the studio, Associate Researcher at CARIP here in Paris. Thank you, sir, very much for your thoughts. And thanks to you for watching too. Stay